and spent a couple of periods of my college life deeply involved in things in Cleveland. The first was an upstart mayoral candidate who came from behind the win in 1989, a guy named Mike White, on whose campaign staff I served. And the second thing actually has everything to do with why we're here tonight and with Jewish Cleveland. When I was a senior at Oberlin, I had the chance to write an honors thesis in my major, which was Judaic and Near Eastern Studies. And I chose to write about the history of Zionism in the Cleveland Jewish community. And so I came up here on the recommendation of a professor of mine who was a sociologist. He said, go see this guy at the Federation. His name is Judah something. Yes. And Judah Rubinstein opened up to me all of the minutes of all of the meetings of your JCRC from the founding of the State of Israel into the 1970s. And he introduced me to the incredible rich resource of the Jewish Community Archives at the Western Reserve Historical Society. And that became my senior thesis. The story of this community and how this community's relationship to the new State of Israel helped your organizations and your community grow and thrive. It was an incredible opportunity to do that work then. I never would have gone to get a PhD without that experience. And so to have the chance to be with you tonight as you mark this incredible history and your incredible success and thriving as a community is really an honor for me. I want to thank you for the invitation. Just a couple weeks ago, we celebrated the 40th anniversary of the Camp David Peace Treaty, the first peace treaty that Israel signed with any of its neighbors with Egypt. That signing on the White House lawn felt like a miracle. And the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty really did achieve a milestone in the long effort to try and resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict. It shifted this conflict from a major interstate conflict in which Israel fought wars with neighboring states in 1948, 1956, 1967, 1973. And after that peace treaty was signed in 1979, Israel never again fought a major interstate war. Now that doesn't mean that there wasn't conflict. But primarily, that peace treaty in 1979 shifted the conflict from a regional conflict to the core of the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. And since that peace treaty, which was signed 40 years ago, last month, Israelis have yearned for normalization in the Middle East, to be a normal state in their neighborhood. But despite the drama and despite the real strategic advantages that that treaty created, despite another peace treaty with another Arab neighbor, Jordan, in 1994, and despite the Oslo process that established mutual recognition between Israelis and Palestinians, Israel is still not a normal part of the Middle East. The Arab Peace Initiative that was proposed in 2002 by the Arab League called for normal relations with Israel after Israel achieved peace agreements with Syria and Lebanon and the Palestinians. And those goals seem farther away than ever. And yet, we see some things going on for Israel in the region today that make us shake our heads and blink with wonder the same way we did when we saw Sadat and Begin on the lawn of the White House. We see an Israeli judoka standing proudly at a podium in Abu Dhabi while the audience stood to hear Hatikva played for his gold medal. We saw the Prime Minister of Israel visit Oman, a country that no Israeli Prime Minister had visited since 1996. And so we have to ask the question, is Israel's isolation in the region changing? Is normalization happening despite the fact that we don't see peace treaties in our near future? At a moment when the region is confronting the greatest turmoil it's faced since the years of Israel's founding, can this situation change? How should we understand the possibilities that we see? Well, there are a few changes that I want to walk us through and then talk about both the opportunities and the challenges that Israel faces in this new environment. The first big changes are the regional changes, and we've all been reading them in the headlines for over a decade now. The old order of the Middle East that the United States worked to uphold along with partners like Egypt and Israel and Saudi Arabia, that old order is gone. Arab leaders are more worried about holding on to their seats of power than they are about their neighbors. In the midst of all of this uncertainty and jockeying for security, Iran has found new opportunities to expand its influence, and it has exploited those opportunities to great effect. Turkey is playing a larger role in regional affairs. We see Russia now re-entering the region in certain ways. We've seen the rise of a new and virulent form of violent jihadism, ISIS, in Syria and Iraq, but also in Sinai, and seeking influence all across the region. And so we've seen Arab governments finding common cause with Israel's government in confronting shared threats. Globally, we've also seen some changes that affect Israel in the Middle East. This common cause against shared threats is reinforced by some changes in global politics, changes that have made a lot of America's traditional regional partners uncertain about the future of our role in this strategic region. We have energy markets that are shifting away from their long-standing dominance on Middle Eastern oil. We have the United States becoming a net exporter of energy. We have the rise of global competition from China and Russia in new ways. We have worries about cohesion on the European continent, where the United States fought so hard and invested so much to win a lasting peace. And in the face of all this, and in the face of 15 years of war for the American military, it may be that the Middle East is looming somewhat less large in the strategic thinking in Washington right now. And if you ask the US military, they will tell you they are already beginning to shift resources from the Middle East to East Asia in order to confront the threat from a rising China. Now, America's interests in the region remain, and our commitments to our friends, I think, remain, and those are unchanged. But our focus has begun to shift. And this leaves our regional partners feeling uncertain about how much they can rely on the United States, and more interested, therefore, in working with one another, even through tensions, to protect their own interests. So there are some real opportunities for Israel in these developments. There's the opportunity for cooperation with regional governments on these security threats, like ISIS, like Iran. We see intelligence cooperation, quiet, behind the scenes, but very regular, very sustained intelligence cooperation between Israel and Arab states. We see Israel becoming an energy powerhouse in the region and becoming an energy exporter. And we saw Israel sign last year with Egypt a 10-year, $15 billion deal for a natural gas project, where Israel's natural gas will go to Egypt for liquefaction, and then Egypt will ship it to the world. These are things that were unthinkable just a few years ago. And then, of course, the rest of the region can't help but admire Israel's technological prowess, its innovation economy, its gains in water reclamation and conservation and desalination at a time when the region is water scarce. It's medical technology, and you see constant reports, all anonymous, that this or that Arab country's private plane has been seen at an airport in Israel bringing someone for medical treatment. Defense technology, there's potential cooperation. Not right now, but perhaps in the future. And in surveillance technology, there is already quite a bit of cooperation. And we know that Israeli companies using European or American go-betweens have sold technology to Arab governments with whom they have no formal diplomatic relations. Now, these are opportunities for Israel, but they also present some challenges. And I'll come to those in a minute. I want to, though, spend just a moment on the question at the core, which is, are these Arab states who are willing to talk to Israeli investors, talk to Israeli tech companies, talk to Israeli intelligence officials, are they willing to talk in open? Are they willing to forge open diplomatic relationships with Israel? And of course, we had the stark, shining example of the Sultan of Oman hosting Israel's leader in October this past year. It was the first time that Omani and Israeli officials had publicly met since 2008. As I said, it was the first time an Israeli leader had visited Oman since after Rabin's assassination. And it is definitely significant that the Sultan of Oman was willing to engage in such a public embrace of the leader of Israel, even in the midst of all this regional turmoil. So does it say to us that Oman was speaking for the rest of the Arab world? That's the question. And I think I have to answer with a probably not. Which isn't to say that the meeting is insignificant and that it doesn't send a message to other Arab governments. I think it does. But Oman is uniquely situated. It's outside the Persian Gulf, but it's a member of the Gulf Cooperation Council. It has very good relations with Saudi Arabia and the UAE. It also has good relations with Iran. In fact, the Sultan has been a sort of bridge builder, a mediator, and a go-between for conflicts all across the region. So does the visit to Oman mean something? Yes, absolutely. But I think the real question is what Oman's Sultan and what its foreign minister told Prime Minister Netanyahu when they met. What did they say to him about what they thought would be necessary to truly unlock doors in the Arab world for Israel? What did they say to him about the importance of an Israeli-Palestinian peace process to that broader normalization? We don't know the answer to that question yet. And so what are we left with? We're left with Arab states in Israel that have a confluence of interests, especially a shared sense of threat that they want to work to combat together. We see Arab states that are willing to go quite far, quietly, to pursue common interests with Israel without waiting for the Palestinians. But they're not prepared to advance formal diplomatic relations, much less normal relations with Israel, unless and until Israel demonstrates a commitment to peace with the Palestinians and its readiness to negotiate borders, refugees, Jerusalem, statehood, this final status issues that were left unresolved by the Oslo process. So at the level of real normalization, the Arab Peace Initiative remains the framework for Arab governments in their contacts with Israel. Now, as Israel pursues these opportunities, as it tries to wedge this door open in the region, as it works to send its judo competitors and its tennis players to competitions around the region, as it tries to build people-to-people ties with Egypt and Jordan, it also has to consider some challenges. The first one relates to Israel's qualitative military edge, which the United States guarantees through our military assistance to Israel. Our commitment that whatever we do to help our Arab partners with military equipment, with military capabilities, we will ensure that Israel always has a qualitative edge. So, for example, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which faces a missile threat from the Houthis in Yemen to the south, has Patriot batteries deployed, American Patriot batteries. But those Patriot batteries are not as sophisticated as the anti-missile batteries that are deployed in Israel to defend against Hamas and Hezbollah rockets. That's just one example of the qualitative military edge. Now, if Israel and Saudi Arabia are really working together to confront shared threats from ISIS, from Iran, does Israel want to loosen its sense of what its qualitative military edge requires? Does it want to allow these Arab Gulf states access to, for example, the most sophisticated version of the F-35 fighter? Or does it want to preserve that edge for itself? You know, you want your partners to have strong capabilities so that you can fight well together. But you never know if it's a partnership but not a true peace and not a true alliance. Might those capabilities one day be turned against you? And the United States, in fact, in its own military partnership with the Arab states, has run into this dilemma just recently, when it was revealed that an American contract to help the Emiratis build surveillance technology to hack into the iPhones of terrorists, basically, had been taken over and used by the Emirati government to hack into the iPhones of journalists and dissidents. So this is a dilemma we have to confront together. We want our partners to have strong capabilities, but we want to be sure we understand where those capabilities will be used and how. We need to think about this also, the United States and Israel together, as we contemplate the possibility of Saudi Arabia building nuclear power plants, which they're very interested in doing, which the United States, in theory, is very interested in selling. But we don't have a Saudi commitment to non-proliferation. We don't have a Saudi commitment to what's called our 1-2-3 agreement on controlling nuclear material. And in fact, the Saudis have said that if the Iranians enrich uranium, they're going to enrich uranium. And if the Iranians get the bomb, they want the bomb. So these are the dilemmas we face, even as the changes in the region present new opportunities. There's one additional factor I wanted to bring to light, which is as Israel emerges from these elections, and I know you all thought I was going to come up here and tell you who's going to win the elections tomorrow. I'm sorry. I can tell you it will either be the Likud or the blue and white. And we'll know in a couple days. But as Israel emerges from these elections, as Israelis consider the big looming question of their future relationship with the Palestinians, they need to think not only about the new friends they are trying to make in the Gulf, but they also need to think about their old friends right next door. And here I'm really thinking about Jordan. Now, I don't know how many of you have had an opportunity to visit the Kingdom of Jordan. It's a place I've been to quite frequently, both for work and for vacation. And it's kind of a miracle that it has survived all of the turmoil around it in all the years of its existence. Its stability is shaky. It's, over the last year, had protests in all its major cities. Its economy is fragile. It survives on economic aid, both from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and $1 billion from here in the United States. And it is Israel's closest partner in the region. Whether it is managing regional diplomacy, brokering relations with other states, managing tensions on the Temple Mount, Jordan is there for Israel. And at crucial times when Jordan has faced challenges, Israel has been there for Jordan. I think particularly of when, in 1970, when the PLO attempted to overthrow the Hashemite monarchy, and the Syrians were about to send forces in to support them. And it was an Israeli military deployment near the border that deterred the Syrians from going into Jordan. So as Israel contemplates the big question of its relationship with the Palestinians and the future of efforts to try and make peace, it needs to think too about the impact on its neighbor Jordan, where more than half the population is Palestinian, and where the Jordanian leadership has a special relationship to the city of Jerusalem and the holy sites there. And I think that brings us back to where we began, to the 40th anniversary of that Egypt-Israel peace treaty. Cast your mind back, those of you who can remember, to that unforgettable moment when Sadat and Begin signed that peace treaty on the White House lawn. What was the emotion that lifted us up at that moment? It was wonder, and it was hope. Hope. Hope that perhaps, against our expectations, the world tomorrow would look different from the world today. And what I worry about most in the Middle East today is that the peoples of this region are tired. They're tired of terrorism. They're tired of war. They're tired of abusive governments in many places. They're tired of politicians who don't fulfill their promises. I worry that the peoples of the region, and I very much include Israelis in this, have lost their hope for a better future. And I worry that without hope, there can be no peace and no normal for Israel in this region. You know, we live in a cynical age. We live in an age in which people are so set in their views, so skeptical, so rigid, that even in our own communities, we sometimes can't believe that we live in the same universe as people who are on the other side of an issue. But we are all humans, and humans need hope. We survive on it. And as Sadat and Begin showed us, hope really can change the lives we lead. There was a wonderful video by an Israeli celebrity this past week marking the 40th anniversary of the Israel-Egypt peace treaty saying, "I'm alive because of this treaty." Israelis are alive today because of that treaty, because Begin and Sadat reached for hope. So I hope that no matter who wins tomorrow's elections, I hope that Israel's leadership and the leadership of its hoped-for partners around the Middle East will all do all they can to build hope for the peoples of the region and build a different future for the peoples of the Middle East. Next month, my husband and I both have conferences in Israel. We're going for business. And so we decided that before we start our work, we're going to take some vacation in Jordan. Now, the first time I crossed from Israel into Jordan was in 1989. And at that time, that border at the Allenby Bridge was officially closed. I was only able to cross it because I had a diplomatic passport, because my father was working at the embassy in Israel. This time, my husband and I will cross over that same border, an open border that Israelis cross for tourism and business every day. It's amazing to think about the change that has happened for Israel in this region when leaders on both sides invest in turning hope into a different reality. So with that, let me stop and look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Tamara, for those insightful words. I actually remember vividly those prior to the Accords when Sadat arrived in Israel, and we were living in the States at the time. My father fought in both the Yom Kippur War and the 6-Day War, and when Sadat walked down the stairs of the plane, when he landed, my father stood at attention and started singing the Tikva. And I was a little girl at the time, but for someone that was born in Israel, whose father fought in the wars, that moment stands the time. So I appreciate those very special memories coming back. We do have a few questions for the audience. One is another Arab Spring coming, given the recent instability in Libya and Algeria?
Wow. Well, you can ask whether the Arab Spring ever really stopped. I know it seemed like all of those demands for change disappeared. I know it seemed like there was a resurgence in Egypt, certainly of the military to control. But I think that the things that drove the protesters into the streets in 2011 never went away. This rising generation of young Arabs who are healthier and better educated than any generation that's come before. They're wired into the world. They know what they don't have access to in their own society, and they know the opportunities they want to be able to reach. And that's ultimately what pushed people into the streets. And that hasn't gone away. So in Algeria, once again, we had an aging leader, no plan for succession, and a lot of young people who had just had enough. Now, Bouteflika's resigned, the military is still firmly in control. I don't know if we're really talking about a revolution yet, but I know we're talking about a possibility for change. And revolutions, of course, are not the only way to make change. You can also make change through negotiation and compromise and gradual reform. And we've seen that in the region since the Arab Spring as well. So my hope is that Algeria will find a path forward to real progress.
This is our second and final question. Will Jordan become the Palestinian state?
No. No, I don't think so. Number one, I don't think it's in Israel's interest for Jordan to become a Palestinian state. I think that King Abdullah is the best neighbor that Israelis and Palestinians could hope for. Moreover, I think that, we talk a lot about Sykes-Picot and lines on a map after World War I and how artificial all these countries are. But the funny thing about artificial countries is that over time they become real, just like we do, right? And the Kingdom of Jordan is a real place with a strong national identity, strong national pride. In fact, there was a recent campaign by the government, the slogan of which was Jordan First. And before Trump, by the way. And so I don't think Jordan will ever be the Palestinian national homeland. There will always be a lot of Palestinians in Jordan. But Palestinians in Jordan are Jordanians, just like Palestinians in Israel are Israelis.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Insightful and thought-provoking remarks. We truly appreciate you being here with us this evening.
At this time, we'd like to recognize Gary Gross for his dedicated and thoughtful leadership as board chair. But first, we'd like to honor his wife, Carrie, who has supported his many dedicated evenings and weekends. We have a beautiful bouquet of flowers, and a donation has been made to Gross Schefter Day School, an organization that carries personal significance to both Gary and Carrie. Now let's take a look at some of the accomplishments during Gary's tenure, which will conclude at a board meeting later this month.
When I thought about being board chair 3 years ago, I knew that it was an unbelievable privilege to assume the position. It's one thing to know that that I'm going to be in the lineup of past board chairs, but the real privilege of being the chair has been to be able to participate in conversations that are so important to the community, that have had such an impact on Jews in Cleveland and around the world.
I knew that he was going to be able to come in and be very, very effective in the position. He is so qualified from all his past experience in the community. He grew up here. I had a great feeling about the things that he was going to be able to do, and I was extremely, extremely happy that he accepted the position.
Gary and I are 2 out of 4 brothers. We were all raised in an environment where Jewish values and Jewish living were of utmost importance. The efforts of my parents are being rewarded in the actions of their sons.
Gary's leadership is really informed by the values that Morton Toby Gross, his parents, brought him up to have. You can see those values in everything that Gary does.
Gary doesn't take on assignments for the honor that goes with a lot of assignments. He does them because something needs to be done. Someone has to take charge or straighten out a situation. And he often found himself in that position, and he never shirked. He always stepped up when he was needed.
The community for several years now has been invested in security. There's nothing that we could be doing that's more important than making sure that our residents are safe in the synagogues and the schools, and to the extent that we can help, we want to help. But things change with the massacre at Tree of Life. I'm so proud of our community that everyone has responded in such a positive way. From small donors to big donors, it has not mattered. People understand that security and safety of Jews in Cleveland is paramount.
How are we going to respond in terms of making the people that will go into school and go into synagogue feel safe? And I felt like he instituted and led up the charge to make sure that we did move along as a community.
He inspires us. He challenges us to do better, to be better. These traits were put to very effective use on behalf of the Jewish community in selecting the successor to Steve Cofman.
That began a process to organize a search committee. It was a privilege to chair the committee. We knew we had very big shoes to fill. When I think back on my term, the number one thing that I'll remember fondly is the process and the result, because I think it's a great result for our community.
If you'd ask him what he's done, he would say to you that he's done what should be expected. And he is a very humble man, and that's a great Jewish man.
We used to look at the wall of past board chairs in the conference center at Federation, and I was in awe of the people that preceded me. It will be a real honor that my picture someday will be beside that same group of men and women who preceded me today.
Gary, you and I have been partners, brothers, friends for a lifetime. And I can think of no better wish for us and for the community that we continue to work together on all the challenges of the Jewish people.
Gary, congratulations on getting through it all and keeping you savvy and your great sense of humor.
You deserve the rest because you can. And the great thing is, you won't be the president, but you'll still be all of it.
Mazel tov, Gary, and I also want to send a hearty congratulations to Carrie because he's now yours again.
Mazel tov, Gary. Mazel tov, Dad. So happy for you.
Gary Gross.
that my picture is still not up. I think they're wondering, let's wait and see what happens. Thank you all. Since this is my last speech as the board chair, I want to thank all of you, the past board chairs, the officers who served with me, the board, and members of the community for giving me the opportunity to serve as board chair these past 3 years. It's been a real honor and privilege. It's something I said in the video. I want to take an opportunity to also thank the professionals at Federation. I've worked closely with many of them. The community is indeed lucky to have them all. Will the Federation staff members please stand and be recognized? Unlike the typical bar mitzvah speech, I want to do my thank yous at the beginning and then make my remarks. First, I want to acknowledge my wife, Carrie. She supported me these past 3 years with great advice concerning my work at the Federation and has kept me out of trouble. She also made our home a place where I relish returning every day. Thank you, dear. By the way, we're not celebrating my completion of the term of office at Disney World. We're taking the family to Israel for Pesach. Next is my brother Harley, my daughter Sarah Zimmerman, and nephew Aaron Gross. All of them watched out for the business while I played hooky. And to my other 2 daughters, Emily and Rachel, they flew in earlier today to be here, just like Dick's daughter came in and son-in-law. It's really an honor and a pleasure that my whole family is here. Would my family, all of you, please stand and be recognized? As I thought about my remarks for tonight, I decided that I would not deliver the same kind of speech that I made my first 2 years, wherein I recounted the year's accomplishments of the community. For these details, please see the annual report. I'm told it's now available. I have one exception to make. A little more than a year ago, our then President Steve Hoffman announced his retirement. And tonight is not the night to recount his accomplishments. We did that at the Cleveland Museum of Art this past November. But following his announcement, the board initiated a search process, and the rest you know. Our tradition says that we stand on the shoulders of giants who come before us. Erica Rudin-Luria is now standing on Steve's shoulders. I can tell you that I continue to be impressed by Erica. She's smart, thoughtful, warm, and as tough as she needs to be, depending on the situation. As one of our current officers said to me recently, I'm fortunate to have worked with Steve and now Erica. No other board chair will be able to say this. We're also blessed that our Jewish Federation is known everywhere as a builder of community. People with different points of view are not only welcome at the table, but are embraced. This has always been important to me, and I pray that this never changes. And now for the issues that keep me awake at night. The rekindling of anti-Semitism in the world and the characterization of the state of Israel. Please know that these are my personal thoughts and not Federation's. First, anti-Semitism. Since World War II, there have been different periods of anti-Semitism. I remember hearing my parents tell the story of their honeymoon trip to Florida in 1948. They had a reservation at a hotel. But were denied a room at the check-in when the clerk realized that they were Jewish. In the 50s, Howard Metzenbaum, long before he became our U.S. Senator, wanted to buy a home in Shaker Heights on Fairmount Boulevard between Cortlandt Oval and Fairmount Circle. Because of the restrictive covenant on the property prohibiting sales to Jews and others, he sued and took the case to the Ohio Supreme Court, which struck down this section of the restriction. In my own lifetime, I've experienced some instances of anti-Semitism firsthand. But for the most part, in recent years, I've not given the issue much thought. Our community had other battles to fight since the war, resettling Jews in Israel, helping victims of the Holocaust, and Jewish continuity, to name a few big ones. But recent events have changed my thinking. In the past 7 years, we've seen 4 Jews killed at a Jewish school in Toulouse, 4 Jews killed at the Hyper Kasher kosher supermarket in Paris 3 years later, and much closer to home, we witnessed the Tree of Life massacre in Pittsburgh. Less tragic events include the desecration and toppling of Jewish headstones here in America and elsewhere around the world. Swastikas being painted on windows of a synagogue in Arizona just 2 weeks ago. A woman marching in a Chicago Gay Pride parade expelled for carrying a rainbow flag with a Jewish star on it. A white man in Charlottesville carrying a sign reading, "Jews will not replace us." And Congresswoman Ilhan Omar questioning the loyalty of American Jews and suggesting that Jewish money explains the U.S. support for Israel and more. There's almost not a day that goes on nowadays when I don't read of yet another anti-Semitic incident, in particular here in America. I have no intention of turning these remarks into a political discussion, but some may argue that I just did. I mentioned Representative Omar, not only because of her clearly anti-Semitic remarks, but also because Congress could not pass a resolution condemning anti-Semitism without also condemning Islamophobia, bigotry, and racism. As Congressman Ted Deutsch said parenthetically, and I mentioned Ted because he was on the board when I served on the board here at Schechter a number of years ago, and his children were here at the school. So I feel I can quote Ted. He said, "Anti-Semitism is worthy of being condemned singularly," end quote. Further, in its most recent audit of anti-Semitic incidents from 2017, released about a year ago, ADL reported that hate crimes in America against Jews had risen by over 57% over the previous year. I could go on, but you get the point. It's extraordinary how things have changed very recently. If I were giving this speech 3 years ago, I never would have considered making these remarks, and I don't do so casually. It reminds me of my dad's bar mitzvah speech given in 1937, and again on the 60th anniversary of his bar mitzvah. He spoke about the plight of Jews in Nazi Germany and expressed the hope that conditions would change. Of course, he did not know the future, and I'm certainly not suggesting for 1 minute that our future will be similar, but I'm sounding an alarm. I do this in spite of the fact that there are so many people in America, in particular, who stood with Jews in tough times. Think about Dick Polk. Think about the outpouring of support following the Pittsburgh massacre. When the Federation planned a community vigil, our non-Jewish friends and colleagues came out in full force, with clergy from many faiths speaking at the event. More than half of all states have passed anti-BDS legislation, with more to come. No doubt, we have friends outside of the Jewish community. But we cannot be complacent, and we must always speak up loudly against anti-Semitic people and protect ourselves. Federation is leading in this area. Why else would we almost triple our security funding since Pittsburgh? For thousands of years, Jews have lived with anti-Semitism. I hope that we will not look back at the roughly 50-year period in America before just the last few as the golden years and pray for the return to that period. Next, I want to speak about Israel. We face several challenges. We have seen an uptick of anti-Semitism as anti-Zionism has increased. Indeed, France's President Emmanuel Macron said recently that he would call out anti-Zionism for what it is, a modern form of anti-Semitism. The second challenge is that those born long after the State of Israel was established often do not feel the same connection to our homeland or the need to protect her as older generations do. I began to volunteer for Federation in 1977 when I was 24 years old. Then, Federation raised money for the community here and abroad, almost exclusively in speaking about our love for the State of Israel. It was only 10 years earlier that Israel was victorious in the Six-Day War. Israelis were giddy, and Jews outside of Israel could stand a little taller. At the start of the war, no one could predict the outcome. I remember well that my family was considering volunteering in Israel during the war in any capacity so that Israelis could fight the war. Following the 1973 war, my best friend from high school made Aliyah, which further strengthened my connections to Eretz Yisrael. For me, during the subsequent years, nothing has really changed. I feel as tied to Israel today as I did as a young boy. This is not true for everyone. Big questions surround Israel and how you view Israel following the establishment of the State of Israel, the Six-Day War, and so on, may determine how you answer difficult questions. What rights do Israelis have over the Green Line? Are Palestinians with Israel proper and over the Green Line treated fairly? What is the right of Jews to a Jewish homeland in Israel? What are the human rights of Palestinians? There have been widely varying views on Israel throughout its history, and even to a greater extent following the Six-Day War. To say the least, it is complicated. Here's my starting point. Jews everywhere are about to celebrate Pesach, during which we were reminded that we went from slavery to freedom. I can't tell this story to my children and grandchildren without thinking about the Jews wandering in the desert and hoping to reach the Promised Land. Whether you believe that God gave the land of Israel to the Jews, or you just look at Jewish history through the ages, the connection to the land of Israel is undeniable. Our patriarchs are buried in Hebron. 2 temples were constructed in Jerusalem, and Jews have lived in the land of Israel in an unbroken way since they crossed the Jordan River thousands of years ago. At the end of the Passover Seder, we say next year in Jerusalem, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. This is meant to be both a spiritual and a literal statement. Fast forward to the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Jews started to return to the land of Israel in increasing numbers. They purchased land from local Arabs. Almost immediately, Jews returning to Palestine, as it was known then, was problematic. There are countless stories of Jews being attacked by Muslims, not the least of which was the Hebron massacre of 1929, when 67 to 69 Jews were killed. Recognizing the incompatible agendas of the Arabs and Jews, in 1937, the British established the Peel Commission, which recommended the partition of the land of Palestine. The Arabs opposed the plan and condemned it unanimously. The Zionist leadership was bitterly divided. They rejected the specific plan, yet the principle of partition is generally thought to have been accepted. In May of 48, the State of Israel was established, which resulted in the displacement of many Palestinians. Where there may have been some cases of Jews pushing the Arabs away from their homes, generally the Arab leadership left their homes expecting to return after the Arabs were victorious. Ilan Pappé, an Israeli Jew and his discredited historian who spoke in Cleveland last fall, and others like him, distort this truth, and others in favor of their own agendas. Recently, the New York Times also distorted history by reporting that most of Jaffa's Arabs were forcibly removed. Yet on April 26, 1948, General Sir Alan Cunningham, the British High Commissioner for Palestine, wrote that the mass flight of Palestine's Arabs was due to collapsing Arab morale and failure of Arab leadership. Sadly, other media do this on a regular basis. The history of this conflict is important to acknowledge. I can't forget that President Clinton, at the end of his presidency, almost delivered a peace agreement between the PA and Israelis, but for Arafat's unwillingness to say that the conflict would be over. When Sharon evacuated every Israeli from Gaza, Hamas soon gained control, encouraging violence and making chances for peace nearly impossible. Recently, Israelis are being compared to Nazis and are said to be guilty of genocide. Could anything be more false? Could anything be more hurtful to the survivors of the Holocaust? But I get it. If one believes that Israelis commit ethnic cleansing and engage in apartheid, then it's easier to accept that Israel should simply completely withdraw from all the territory captured in 1967, including the Golan Heights. What outcome would you expect from returning land to Syria? One final thought. Israelis aren't the only ones who believe that there's no Palestinian partner for peace today. Last year, I heard Gaith Al-Omari, a Palestinian scholar who works for the Washington Institute for Near East Studies, a think tank located in Washington, D.C., say the same thing. There is no Palestinian for partner now. So why have I made these remarks? I expect that few will take issue with my remarks about anti-Semitism, and many will have my perspective about Israelis. But I'm not naive. I know that some of you will be upset with my comments about Israel. Of course I care about the people with different perspectives. What I care about most is the way we stay together at the same table. There are so many needy Jews right here at home, in Israel and around the world. I want all of us to continue to visit Israel, the birthplace of our people and homeland of the Jews. Express your views, disagree with one another, but never walk away. We Jews are a very small people. We can't afford to lose anyone. Wishing you all a Chag Kasher v'Sameach.
Do you think he's passionate? So Gary, on behalf of the Federation Board, the professional staff, and all the beneficiary agency leaders, I want to thank you for all you've done for Jewish Cleveland. And please accept this token of our community's appreciation. The Yad, the Torah pointer that appears on the screen, is the creation of renowned artist Sari Sulovich, who we understand is one of your favorite artists. The inscription reads, V'chol ma'asecha yehiyu l'shem shamayim, which translates to, and all your deeds will be for the sake of heaven. And Gary, I have to say that there is no one person that better suits than you, especially as your Federation Board Chair tenure has been for the sake of heaven, all of the work that you do. So mazel tov, and we're lucky to have you.
That brings us to the end of the program. What a wonderful evening. Please join me in thanking the Federation staff for putting together such a special 115th annual meeting. And thank you, Jewish Cleveland, for being with us here tonight.
And on behalf of everyone who helped for your time and support of the Federation, thank you for making an impact together. Please enjoy dessert and refreshments in the back of the room. Good night and Laila Tov.